Okay, so welcome back to another episode of the podcast. It is just me and Kieran myself right now, but I'm gonna go ahead. We're gonna start this off. My name's Justin Miller,
My name's Kieran.
and today on the topic that we're gonna be talking about is Florida's rivers. Now, before we get started on the rivers, both Kieran and myself attempted to reach out to individuals at the Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission, the FWC, state parks all around Central Florida, and also professors at UCF, but they were unable to provide their time to do a short interview, as when we were attempting to reach out to them, the effects of Hurricane Nicole was making landfall, and then post Nicole, their effects, they weren't able to offer any of their time. So, without further ado, I'm gonna get it started. There's primarily three main rivers that can be seen throughout Florida, but there are many types, and that list would just be way too long. So the first one we're going to start with is the Blackwater River systems. These are primarily found throughout the Panhandle and the Peninsula. The swamps and marshes provide the bulk of the water for the riverways. These are usually nutrient deprived. They have very acidic soils, and they're dark due to the decaying plant matter that are found within these riverways, which give them their name, the Blackwater. The next one up we have is the Whitewater Riverways, which these are usually found in the Panhandle. The water is supplied from Georgia, Alabama, and depending on the parts, usually it can be in Mississippi, but not always the case. These are very nutrient rich, and these very rarely ever fully dry up because the water's coming down from like the mountains. Then the next ones we have are the third one, final one, I should say, is our spring feds, and these are fed from springs. The water is usually crystal clear and very mineral rich. These are supplied by the Florida Aquifer, and these are primarily found mostly through the northern peninsula. So, Kieran, what would you say would be the biggest threats right now that the Florida riverways are facing?
I would have to say that the biggest threat would be pollutants right now. There's the issue of nutrient overload. Normally, having like nitrogen and phosphorus is necessary for an ecosystem, but in large excess quantities, it can actually turn out to be very harmful and toxic. This can cause algal blooms, which can just completely take over. They thrive off of the phosphorus and the nitrogen, and it causes something called eutrophication. Once the algae then dies, it creates pockets of hypoxic water, and this nutrient overload can be caused by both human issues and animal waste, and mainly sewage, wastewater, fertilizer from our farms, and industrial runoff that just makes its way into the rivers. The devastating impacts are from when the algae actually die, rather than the actual algae covering everything. Then from the going back to the sewage runoff, bacteria in the form of fecal coliform, which comes from the intestinal tracts of warm-blooded animals, so both things like deer or even people, contaminates the water, which can cause devastating effects to the wildlife as well as plants and other things living in the rivers. A lot of the bacteria comes from people's broken sewer lines that failed to be checked, failing septic tanks, and animal waste, which unfortunately there's not much that can be done about animals going where they need to go. But the other two are very fixable. In terms of other pollutants, we have things such as mercury and dioxin, air pollution, pesticides, herbicides, even household cleaning products make their way into the waters. Sewage in general can serve as, again, uh, a great source of phosphorus, nitrogen, other microorganisms, creating like a deadly soup of different algal blooms in the rivers. So From the increase in eutrophication of our rivers, what do you think the potential human health effects that result from that would be?
So again, to kind of circle back to when we're talking about the bacteria, again, coliform from the intestinal tract of warm-blooded animals, humans, deer, it all can come back to that you're drinking water. So if you're going to be drinking that and you don't have proper maintenance or any kind of sewage treatment, you can be drinking that contaminated water, which can then lead to E. coli outbreaks. And again, coming back to human impact, another human impact is the water withdrawals. So currently, according to the St. Johns Riverkeeper, for Central Florida alone, it's reaching its limits of sustainability with the Florida aquifer. So as a result, they're going to have to start making plans to withdraw from the St. Johns River in order to keep up with the demand for the need of water. As Central Florida just keeps booming in population, you need to get that water from somewhere. If you can't get it from the aquifer, you're just going to start pulling it from rivers or any kind of water bank, really, which is only going to lead to the increased effects of the pollution and disabling the wildlife because you're lowering the water concentration. As a result, you're going to increase your concentration of these pollutants. And another one that we're going to talk about is habitat loss. So again, with humans, construction, urban development has caused serious degradation of the river and has placed pressure on the habitat for both aquatic and terrestrial animals because they all need that water to live. And if we keep pulling it away or we keep dredging it or moving it somewhere else, we're going to be altering that habitat. And kind of a big legal battle, according to the St. Johns Riverkeeper, in June 15th, 2018, a Florida Circuit judge named Charles Dodson ruled in favor of environmental organizations that the Land Conservation Constitutional Amendment, overwhelmingly approved by the voters in 2014, requires funding to be used for land acquisition, restoration, and management, not for the other purposes. And as a result, they filed the suit because the state legislature was violating the Water and Land Conservation Amendment by taking those funds or unauthorized budget expenses and use them somewhere else instead of the land acquisition and restoration. So basically, it was almost like a form of embezzlement. They're moving the money somewhere else where it wasn't supposed to be going. And another sustainable issue is, again, we're going to go back to the St. Johns River drainage potentially, because as the water and aquatic life need that, if we keep moving away that water, animals like deer, alligators, fish, and multiple fish species are going to get diverted because they need that water to live, or they use that water as as a form of reproduction for plants. So again, this is going to create additional stress and only further increasing the negative feedback loop from plants, animals to overall, eventually to humans as a result of what we're doing. Another one, a human impact that we're doing to the rivers, is also the particles in the water causing harm to wildlife, decreasing visibility overall, making things very hard for animals to live in. And another one is dredging. So dredging is going to cause higher water levels, potentially in certain areas, increasing the flood risk for humans, higher salinity as salt water shifts from upstream. Higher salinity areas can be devastating to freshwater plants and animals that are very freshwater tolerant and not, say, saltwater tolerant. And dredging is going to result in reshaping the meanders of rivers, which is going to create an altered hydrology pattern, and the subsequent wildlife are going to follow that new pattern and create more microhabitats that are more dry in areas and more areas that were usually very dry but are now very soaked. They're very water covered now. And according again to the St. Johns Riverkeeper, just for another example, the Indian River Lagoon, as a result of dredging and moving water, has, just for aquatic plant species, their seagrass coverage has been lost up to 90%. So Kieran, how would you say the restoration efforts have gone? More specifically, what are the issues that organizations face when attempting to implement conservation or restoration efforts?
I'd say there's quite a few issues that they're facing at the moment. Mainly just the efforts to restore portions of the ecosystem. There's data showing, that size is a big issue. Large-scale approaches have been found to be more impactful than smaller, fine-scaled approaches, though the issues that come with that are size to cost. Mainly, the larger the project, the larger the amount of time, the amount of cost, the amount of resources it requires, and the bigger chance that all of this is going to be lost due to if it potentially fails. This, mixed with the fact that smaller scale operations aren't always successful either, and it can lead to the public getting this false idea that restorative efforts aren't actually worth it, and the new techniques and other things being used in environmental restorations just being discounted when in reality they're actually very valuable.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any current rehabilitation projects that you think show any promise in restoring the ecosystems, and do you think they'd be effective?
Yeah, so there is one large-scale restoration effort, which was a case study by P.J. Wallen, L.A. Toth, and J.W. Coble, and P.K. Strayer on the Kissimmee River restoration effort, which they looked at it as a case study approach, which came out in 2002. So during 1962 to 1971, the Kissimmee River was channelized, and it saw an increase in depth of meandering water body as well as an increase of width up to 100 meters. These changes implemented use of compartmentalization levees in order to control the river flooding in the area to allow for higher number of farms and settlements in the floodplain region of the river ecosystem. With this addition to the Kissimmee River, it found itself losing a high number of fish species and saw an overall biological, chemical, and physical aspect of the river to be altered to allow for commercial efforts of farming to be introduced into the riverbanks. The introduction of the industry onto the banks of the river also introduced many environmental issues to the body, with the spatial and temporal schedules of the water level and flow now being regulated by man instead of nature, causing a disruption in the river functionality integrity of the natural fisheries. This disruption affected the ability for these fishing populations to be harvested, since the vital flooding periods during the key parts of the reproduction cycle were inverted with the corrected amount of flooding not occurring during the fishery stage. The restoration efforts came in 2001, almost about 30 years later, and explosively opened with the destruction of a boat lock and a water control structure, and continued on with many other phases that were led by clearly defined expectations with successful results in most, if not all, of those phases. This success is attributed towards 10 recommendations that were endorsed by Troth and Uman, following for well thought out efforts that were being well understood how to supplement the issues being seen in that water ecosystem.
While all the details that we outlined today in today's episode may have seemed rather doom and gloom, the restorative efforts and public initiative has showcased the desire to restore and or repair our existing waterways, as they are a critical aspect in all of the residents of Florida. The Kissimmee River Project, or the legal battles that nonprofit organizations or governmental institutions have won, have inspired hope for future generations to advance the river's health throughout all of Florida. However, everyone in the state of Florida can do their part by watching the amount of fertilizers that they use, clean up pet waste, and ensuring that the septic tanks of their individual homes are frequently inspected for cracks or breaks in sewer lines, as these could potentially have devastating impacts on our rivers, but also human health overall.
So we hope you all did enjoy it, and stay tuned for the next one.